this is Chris from Deus Ex Machina, and we are here talking about, once again, IPs that I would love to adapt into a tabletop RPG, most likely using current 5th edition rules. We talked about my previous list, which was probably very long, because we talked about a lot. Hopefully I got that video cut down to a good length. We talked about a few that didn't make the list: Oblivion, Mortal Engines, Dark City, Vesper, Battle Los Angeles, and Prospect. And then the 10 I would go for: Titanfall, Control, Anthem or Destiny, Remnant, Jupiter Ascending. And now we're talking about the bottom 5, which is going to be a very unusual list. Let's get to it. And with number 5, and that is a TV show which I'm sure a few of you have heard of or watched. That's called Into the Badlands. Have you seen it? If you haven't, go watch it. It was on AMC. It ran for 3 seasons. I own the Blu-ray. It is a martial art, post-apocalyptic martial arts science fiction show with magic. Science fiction because obviously it's post-apocalyptic. It's in a future that the society has collapsed. We're back to feudalism. And there are these types of really extremely trained martial artists and that protect these new feudal lords. Everybody knows Kung Fu. Everybody is good at Kung Fu. And I think that would be really, truly interesting. I would love to do an actual Into the Badlands. I wouldn't just play off of and do an inspired setting. I would like to do Into the Badlands. How would I do it? It would be very interesting because what I would do, I would take the martial artist, which is from Ultramodern 5, the monk from 5e. I would deconstruct those 2 classes into what they do. I would take the Grandmaster archetype and I would whittle and create at least four very different martial art classes, and take the Grandmaster's Kung Fu kind of specialties, and I would peel them off and create more detailed abilities for them. So it would be a book that would be suddenly, instead of having one martial artist, the Grandmaster and the monk, it would be 4 very distinctive martial art variations and playing off of that. So, and then create a lot of customization so the players can feel, even though you're a martial artist and I'm a martial artist and they're a martial artist, we all feel different. We all have different abilities. That I would be interested in doing that. That would be cool. I think it would be a challenge to try to create 4 martial artists classes that act and operate differently. I think that would be interesting. Number 4 is Alita Battle Angel. This speaks for itself. Obviously, Ghost in the Shell would be higher on this list, mind you. I'd still rather do a Ghost in the Shell. But Alita Battle Angel, I'm a big fan of. I love the movie. I love the manga. I have not read all of the manga. I've seen the original OVA from the late 80s. I'm that old. And I've obviously seen the movie, and I absolutely love the movie. I think it's an incredibly faithful, probably the most faithful anime adaptation out there. It's incredibly faithful. There are a few things I would do differently, but it's a fantastic, fantastic film. And so I would love to play off of that. I mean, they have the Motorball game. You can play around with that. I get to develop rules for Panzer Kunst, I think it's called. And obviously that would be playing off of the martial artist class that I did with Into the Badlands. Once again, you've got cyberization, which I've done with Neurospastus. Again, to play with that would be really interesting. Getting in the post-apocalyptic setting, you got the monster stats of all the robots. Some of it would be me rehashing ideas because I'd be pulling some ideas off of Neurospastus for the cybernetics. But, and then obviously creating a bunch of robot stats. I've been doing that. Ultramodern 5 and Neurospastus have a bunch of monster robots. But I think that would still be cool. And then playing rules for Motorball and all of that. And then just the setting itself is interesting. I think the setting itself would be something to develop and it'd be very fascinating. But yeah, that would be my desire to do that for Battle Angel Alita. I think that would be a recognizable IP, and that's why once again I would rather do Ghost in the Shell. But Battle Angel Alita I think would definitely be on my short list for that, and that's why it is number 4. Number 3 is one I also tried to snag but couldn't get, and that is Dead Space. I love Dead Space. I played Dead Space 1, 2, and 3. I watched a playthrough of the Wii game, and I played twice through the remake, which is fantastic. Came out last year. If you haven't had a chance to play the Dead Space remake, it is Really good. I wish they would do that and do that with 2 and 3 as well. I would love to see it. I'd love to see Dead Space 4 as well. And the reason why I would want to do Dead Space, beyond the fact that necromorphs are cool, and so they're a monster type that we get to play with, it's the dark space setting, which is one of my all-time favorites. I'm a diehard fan of dark space, so Pandorum and Alien, it all fits into that kind of genre. Dead Space is an homage to those. So being able to play off Dead Space is really cool. Now, that being said, some people who are fans of mine know I have played heavily with this format. The module coming out for this Kickstarter from last year has one called Threshold. Threshold has a lot. It basically is the closest thing I can get to do with Dead Space without creating Dead Space. We have a couple different types of monsters, which we introduced in Ultramodern 5, the Xenobites, and not the skin, but we have other ones, and Descendants and so forth. So we played around with similar ideas without just saying that they're necromorphs. And we've created the dungeon maps, like these interchangeable dungeon maps, for Threshold as well, which I'm very much a fan of. And I hope we could get to expand that and create more of these maps, which I think would be really cool. For me, though, it's that construction system for weapons, specifically non-Dead Space 1 and 2, and this is where it gets controversial. It's Dead Space 3. Now, Dead Space 3, people complained because it was too action-orientated. The story is a bit wishy-washy. Some people talked about the microtransactions. I'm not talking about that. But it has a fantastic crafting system where you get to make dozens and dozens and dozens of different types of weapons, hundreds of combinations based on chips, drivers, frames, tips, and so forth. Now, once again, if people know me, know that I did exactly that. It's in Conestoga, one of the Affinity books. I basically took the Dead Space crafting system and I converted it to 5e. Made it my own. There's actually more combinations, more different. There's a greater variety of weapons in Conestoga than there is in Dead Space. But a lot of those end results in Dead Space are in here as well. So I think that would be really cool, swapping modules out to create different weapons, create different guns, and then there are the chips you can to make them even more powerful. That itself. So yeah, in that situation, I would just take the crafting system from Affinity Conestoga, alter it slightly, and then put it into a Dead Space. Take the necromorphs, plug them in, create the mapping system from Threshold, plug it in, and then obviously I'd create a lot more the lore, bring all that stuff in, and then even do adventures. And like obviously the first module would be Ishimura, and then Dead Space 2, and the Dead Space 3, and then potentially even follow up and do a Dead Space 4. What would happen if Dead Space 4 happened? You know, the Necro Moons arrive at Earth, and it's basically what we were hoping that Dead Space 4 would be. Once again, EA is not talking. They are not interested in adapting tabletop RPGs. So, and I actually went through proper channels. I pitched them like, here are the list of ones I wanted to address, and they said, we're not interested. Maybe I just need a good lawyer or just know who to talk to. If someone's watching this video that goes, hey, I do know who to talk to and I do know how to get it, let's do a Dead Space RPG. Like I said, we're getting down to the list of ones I would love to do. I would love to do a Dead Space one. And the only thing that's stopping me is the fact that I've already done 60 to 70% of the work already. So from fans' perspective, they may look at it and go, well, I already own Conestoga, I own Threshold, so there isn't that much more other than the setting, the lore, and all the monsters. But Dead Space would be really cool. That would be really interesting for me. So that leads us to number 2. And number 2 is one that's, if you've been a fan of mine, if you've been a follower of mine, Mom, for a very long time, then you know that this one was going to come up on the list, and that is The Matrix. I'm really shocked that there isn't an official tabletop RPG of The Matrix. Obviously, there's tons of opportunities. You're from Zion, you've been plugged out of The Matrix, you're going back in you've developed skills, you know, kung fu and fighting skills. And so that's really neat for me. And I'd have to create rules so characters aren't just plugging everything into their system. There's a limit. You can plug specific skills in, and there's a limit to how many you can, so everyone is specialized. You have people who know kung fu better or combat better, who know how to drive better. Then you have the real world with the sentinels and all that, and then you have the Matrix itself. You get to create different time periods you get to play with. Do you want it to be a earlier version of the Matrix? Do you want it to be the current version with Neo? Do you want it to be the later version with Resurrection? My own condition to this is that I would want to play around, not say play around with the lore. I wouldn't want to alter anything that's been predefined. I would want to add some more layers to it to give players a bit more freedom. Which would be very controversial because obviously this wouldn't be a canonical idea. But people who remember me, know me, been around for a long time, know that before I went legit and I formed Deus Ex Machina and I had my Serena Dawn Spaceport and my homebrew games were on there. Homebrew games included the first version of Necropolis, first version of Conestoga, which is nothing like the Conestoga we have now. My Ghost in the Shell RPG, Alien Fusion, which is probably my most popular homebrew out there, one of the most popular homebrew games, I think, for a lot of people. A lot of people still talk about it. And the next project I was going to do was a Matrix D20. And I had grabbed all the art assets. I was probably a couple weeks from starting that before I went legit with Amethyst, and I abandoned that project. But you can still go to the Wayback Machine to 2008, 2010, and you'll see the Serena Dawn page, and you'll see the Matrix D20 coming soon poster there. So I was planning on doing it. But I was going to add a little bit to the lore. With Ready Player One, Free Guy, or any movie that's dealing with some kind of virtual environment, they kind of always misjudge what a popular game would be. This is the most popular game in the world. And you'd say most popular game in the world, more popular than any of the current games. So it must have 20, 30 million or more active players. And in the case of something like the Oasis, it's something like 1 billion to 2 billion people play the Oasis. And I'm like, where are they? Why is it we never see more than a couple hundred? There's this big, gigantic battle at the end of Ready Player One, and I look at it and go, there's a couple thousand people there. What happened? Where are the other millions upon millions of people playing this? And same thing with Free Guy. I always look like, we never see more than 5 or 6 players at a time. Where are they? And of course, if you know online gaming, you know the perfect answer is because they're on a different server. That's how these games do it. They don't when you're joining up onto an online game or an MMORPG, you'll see a couple dozen people, maybe at best. A really, really successful one may have a couple hundred people on a server, and sometimes a couple thousand if the server is really robust. But most of the time, it's not that many. And the reason why is that you can't load up a certain world with too many people because the computer crashes. It can't handle the stress. And so at its peak, like World of Warcraft had hundreds and hundreds of servers and so so each one had this own little server world. And so you could create a character in one server, and your players could be, and this has happened with me with the Old Republic. When the Old Republic was really big 10 years ago, I had joined the PvE server, and then all my friends joined the PvP server, which really, really annoyed me. So I had a couple friends that were playing with me, but a good chunk of my other friends were off messing around with the PvP server. So there was a point where I decided, okay, I'm going to create a brand new character on this server, on the PvP server, so I can join my friends. And so I went to the PvP server, joined up, made a character, and then around this time people started quitting the game. All my friends ended up quitting the game, so I now suddenly had 3 characters. I had 2 characters on a PvE server and 1 character on a PvP server, which was very, very annoying because I don't like PvP, and so that character kind of got stuck there. So when we think about the Ryan Reynolds character from Free Guy, I look at it and go, it's like, well, is there one, or are there a million versions of Free Guy all trying to gain sentience? It's something that we always kind of assume. And so when I look at the Matrix was retcon, for the people who don't know. The original Matrix, if you read the original script, it was an analogy of Earth. So there were definite mentions of specific cities and countries. It was our world in a virtual environment. When we got to 2 and 3, they retconned it because they took a lot of those instances out when they filmed Matrix 1, so they didn't have to define it. But in 2 and 3, they eventually retconned it, so it's just one single city. The entirety of the human race attached to the power plant are living within a single city, and that was they just made that retcon and just said everyone was living inside the city, and the city was this giant. It was the largest city ever, but it was still one single city where everyone was living. And I thought, oh, so that's a server. Is that the only server? So the idea being, would there be multiple matrices? And would there be multiple machine nations? And so in the adventure that I was going to run with my characters, it's set after the third film, where there's an impromptu kind of unstable piece, kind of what we see with the Matrix Online video game, which was, oddly enough, an online game. And the characters uncover a digital virtual tunnel. And when they go through it, they emerge into another city with another matrix. And that's when they realize that there's actually multiple matrices, and there could potentially be multiple Zions being, so forth. And then that was playing off of the idea of each matrix was run by a machine nation, and some of these machine nations do not get along. In fact, some of them are actively at war with each other. It's like there's so much more potential lore. And I was wondering, with the new film Resurrections, I was so hoping that they would play on the idea that there were multiple instances. I think it's an untapped twist that they could have played on, that there is a Japanese or a Chinese matrix, and that is a completely different, and it may not even be a current version. It may not look identical. They talked about this was their sixth version of the Matrix. Maybe one in China, still on version 1, they managed to make it work. Perhaps the Japanese one is an entirely fantasy world that's very over the top with mecha and anime and so forth, because that's what they embraced. And when we move from the North American Matrix, which is we've been following for the entire franchise, into the Matrix done by this other machine nation, we see a completely different system go down. We've seen ideas like this played around with Westworld, where they go from one Westworld to another Westworld, and it's samurai world, and it's and you have their own issues there. I think that would be really interesting, and I think that would be me. So that's one where, yeah, there are rules and stuff we get to play with, but there's part of me that's more interested in mucking around with the setting. So that is number 2, and that leaves number 1. What is number 1? Well, number 1 is Mass Effect. Going back to video games, Mass Effect. I'm a huge fan of Mass Effect. I played and completed the original trilogy multiple times. When the Legendary Edition came out, I played that to completion. I have my own set of decisions that I'm very proud of. There's a 2.5-hour video on this channel dealing about Mass Effect, where we go into the kind of democratization of its canon, which I thought was very interesting. And I think that there's a lot of untapped potential there. Now, there is actually a homebrew Mass Effect game you can find online. And one thing I find interesting, I do believe, if I remember correctly, that it heavily borrows from Ultramodern 5, which is fantastic. That's exactly what I wanted someone to do. I wanted someone to play off of my rules and create these types of homebrew rules, and I think Mass Effect is exactly what I want. You get to pick your time period. You can make it post Mass Effect 3, not sure why you would, during the war, seems pretty obvious, or leading up to it, which means games 1 and 2. You can do something that's obviously, we don't know where Mass Effect 4 is going to happen. I obviously want to know what the storyline is for Mass Effect 4 before I would develop it, because I don't want to create anything that could break their canon and what they have in mind. You got all your alien races. That seems pretty straightforward and obvious. Play as one of those. You've got all your classes, biotics, all that stuff. There is so much. I mean, yeah, I would do the classes right off the bat. All the classes that have ever been introduced, including like vanguards and sentinels and so forth. You have the races as well. Then you get to play with all the weapons. The only downside with a Mass Effect is that it's too damn big. Like, of all the ones I've talked about so far, there was like, oh, this is one book. I can do almost all of these in one book. Mass Effect, I don't think I could do that in one book. I think it would have to be 2 or 3 books. I mean, just from the core system, like the core mechanics, core rules, it would be one book on its own, and then a setting book where we add monsters. Like it would have to be, there would actually have to be. Like me, I generally throw everything in one book. Ultramodern 5, Amethyst, everything, character creation, setting, monsters are all in basically in one book. That's how I've always done it. Mass Effect, player's book, DM book, monster manual, because there's so much. The player's book would be just massive. DM's book just talking about lore and setting and adventures, and then just a monster manual, and it's just Mass Effect monsters. And because there's so many, like there's 100, 150 you could play from one all the way to Reapers and go all the way to the end. Because you fight Reapers, so why not have a full Reaper stats? I mean, maybe not Sovereign specifically, but our general Reaper would definitely be in there. Oh yeah, and you got mechs. Ugh, good lord, and all the weapons. EA obviously has a real issue with analog versions of their games. Like they don't seem to want to do it. We don't see. You think that it would at least be a board game. Like we would at least see board games, but we don't. We don't see board games. We don't see like there isn't a Dead Space miniatures game. There isn't a Mass Effect. And people are going to say, oh yeah, there's a Mass Effect Clue game, Mass Effect Risk maybe, Mass Effect Monopoly, but that doesn't really count. So EA doesn't seem to be interested in developing analog versions of their properties, which seems like a misstep because they have so many good properties that have a lot of potential. The fact that they would ignore expanding out. I mean, you can't think like, well, if they're buying your board game, they're not going to be playing our video game. I'm like, that. There is no evidence that that's the case. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It's shown that we help each other rather than trying to decrease it. Like people are not going to buy the Mass Effect role-playing game and go, well, I'm not going to buy the video game. That does not. That they don't. There's no correlation between those. But yeah, Mass Effect would be my number one. So anyway, that's my list. Please tell me which ones you guys would like me to do a video on specifically, and talk about homebrew rules. We'll go into specifics about what we're interested in, maybe play around with some sheets and talk about what ways we can do it. Some of them I'm more interested. I'm just because obviously some of them we'd be focusing on character creation. Like if we're doing Remnant or Into the Badlands, Mass Effect, we'd be diving heavy into character creation. With things like a lot of the other ones, Control, Alita and Dead Space, we're doing a lot of technical stuff, weapons, monsters. So I wouldn't want to do like just character creation ones. I'd like to mix it up here and there. So let me know, guys, in the comments. Or if you think there's a property that I've missed that I think is absolutely worthy of having a tabletop RPG adaptation, specifically going into a 5e adaptation, say in the comments. And if you want to see me try to adapt it, let me know as well. So anyway, that's me. Thanks for listening in, and I will talk to you guys later. Bye.